Lena had always loved working late at the quiet office, and her colleague Mark thought it was just dedication. But when they stayed after hours one stormy night, the fluorescent lights began to flicker. Shadows twisted into shapes that shouldn't exist, and something in the building started watching, waiting. What they discovered behind the locked doors would change their lives forever. I had always thought my office was just a normal, boring place. Rows of cubicles, humming computers, flickering fluorescent lights, the occasional buzz of a printer. It was all predictable, sterile, safe. That's why I never expected anything unusual to happen. But the first night I stayed late, working on a report nobody seemed to care about, I realized I was wrong. Something in that building was alive. At first it was subtle. The hum of the air conditioner grew uneven, almost like it was breathing. I paused at my desk, listening, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. My chair creaked, and I told myself it was old. But then I noticed the shadows. They didn't behave normally. They stretched across walls at odd angles, sliding along the floor as if they were searching for something. I glanced at the clock. It seemed late, but the hands moved slower than they should have. I tried to focus on my work, forcing myself to type, but the words blurred. My eyes kept darting to the elevator at the far end of the hall. Its doors were closed, yet they weren't still. They shivered, a subtle vibration that grew stronger the longer I stared. It was as though something inside was pressing against them, hungry, eager to get out. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was exhaustion, the office's monotony playing tricks. Then the phone rang, sharp, piercing. I jumped. Nobody was supposed to be calling at this hour. The line was silent at first, but then a faint static filled my ears. I held the receiver closer, and that's when I heard it. Breathing heavy, wet, deliberate breathing. Slow, irregular, and close enough that I could almost feel it on my face. I froze, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. I wanted to hang up, run, scream, but curiosity held me in place, chained to my desk. My eyes wandered to the security monitors mounted on the wall. The screens showed every corner of the office, empty and fluorescent lit. But then I noticed it. At the far end of the hall, just beyond the cafeteria, a figure stood, motionless, dark, human-shaped, but not quite human. Its face was blurred, featureless, and yet I felt it watching me. My heart pounded, and a cold sweat ran down my back. I leaned closer to the screen. The figure didn't move. I blinked. When my eyes refocused, it was gone. But the floor bore a faint, greasy handprint where it had stood, smudged and wet, glistening under the harsh lights. The hairs on my arms bristled. I tried to tell myself it was someone playing a prank, a trick of light and shadow, but I was alone. The building was empty except for me. The night janitor had left hours ago, and the security guard wouldn't even be on duty until midnight. My breathing became shallow. My chair scraped slightly against the floor. I looked down. Nothing, just my shoes, slightly scuffed, and a dropped paperclip. But I could have sworn the sound came from behind me, from the shadows between cubicles. I forced myself to stand, to walk toward the hall, to confront whatever or whoever was there. Every step felt heavier than the last. The carpet muffled my footfalls, yet I could hear the faint echo of something else, steps that didn't belong to me. Light, deliberate, following in rhythm with my heartbeat. I quickened my pace. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I reached the hall where the figure had appeared on the monitor. The handprint was gone. The air smelled faintly of metal and damp concrete. I stepped closer, my breath misting in the cold air, and then I saw a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I spun. Nothing, just empty hallways, the elevator trembling faintly as if shivering. I stepped back, my mind screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't move. Some part of me was drawn to the unknown, to the figure, to whatever waited in the shadows. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and for a fraction of a second, I saw it, standing at the end of the hall, closer than before. Its blurred face seemed to stretch, almost smiling. Its eyes, though impossible to distinguish, felt like they pierced through me. And in that moment I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. The light snapped back and it was gone. Only silence remained. Only the hum of the air conditioner, now steady, almost innocent. My hands shook. I backed toward my desk, my chair scraping across the floor again, though still no one was there. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that stress and long hours had finally broken my mind. But when I looked at my computer screen, my own reflection stared back at me, and behind me, just barely visible in the glass, a shadow lingered. It didn't move, didn't breathe, it just waited. And I realized, with a cold, sinking horror, that whatever was in the office that night wasn't going anywhere. The next night I told myself I wouldn't let fear control me. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping daylight or at least the illusion of safety would keep the shadows at bay. The air smelled of stale coffee and recycled paper. Normal enough, but my chest tightened with every step. Every corner, every cubicle seemed alive, watching, waiting. I shook my head, trying to laugh at myself. I was being ridiculous. I turned on my computer and the screen flickered, as though it resented my presence. I shook the thought away and started my work, but it didn't take long for the feeling to return. I could feel eyes on me, not just from the monitors, not just from the hallways, but from everywhere, from the walls themselves. Every reflective surface, computer screens, glass walls, even the stainless steel coffee machine seemed to ripple with movement, like liquid shadows flowing just beneath the surface. I tried to concentrate on the spreadsheet in front of me, but my mind kept drifting. I noticed the supply closet at the end of the hall. The door, which I had closed firmly yesterday, was slightly ajar. A cold draft seeped out from it, carrying the faint smell of damped cardboard. Hesitant, I approached. Inside, the shelves were filled with office supplies, but they were arranged in a way that made no sense. Pens pointed toward the ceiling, folders stacked crookedly, paperclips bent into shapes that vaguely resembled letters or symbols. I crouched to get a better look, my stomach tightening. The shapes seemed to form words, though I couldn't read them. My skin prickled. Whoever or whatever had done this had waited for me. I straightened and walked back to my desk, trying to ignore the feeling crawling up my spine. That's when I noticed my computer screen. It had turned on by itself. The desktop wallpaper was a photo of my office, but not the office I knew. In the picture, I was sitting at my desk, alone, or at least, I thought I was alone. Then I saw it, a dark figure standing in the corner, just barely visible, just behind me. Its hand stretched toward my chair. I froze. I looked behind me. Nothing. The chair sat empty, still tucked neatly under the desk. My heartbeat quickened. The shadows under the cubicles seemed to twitch, as if reacting to my fear. I could hear soft, almost imperceptible sounds. The scrape of shoes across the floor, a faint whisper from the hallway, the rustle of papers that shouldn't move. Every sound made me jump. I tried to calm myself. I told myself it was my imagination, exhaustion, stress. But the office had a way of reminding me that I was not alone. I passed the restroom and noticed the faucet dripping. The drops echoed too loudly, each one like a drumbeat in the silence, and then I saw the reflection in the mirror. Not my own reflection, but a shadow crouched behind me, stretching impossibly long, slithering across the tiles. I spun around, empty. By the time I returned to my desk, I was shaking. My coffee sat untouched, the steam rising lazily, curling toward the flickering fluorescent lights. I reached for my pen, and it rolled across the desk toward the edge, stopping abruptly. I frowned. That hadn't happened when I set it down. I glanced at the floor and there it was. Footprints, dark and elongated, leading from the hallway to my desk. Too large to be mine, too deliberate to be random. They stopped at my chair. I forced myself to look at the monitor again. The figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the armrests, trying to steady my breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but some part of me couldn't look away. I noticed the corner of the office where the shadow had first appeared flicker with movement. A shape formed briefly, a tall, dark silhouette, blurred and impossibly thin. It melted into the wall when I blinked, leaving only the faintest impression of a face pressed just behind the glass. And then, the phone rang. I flinched. There was no one else in the building. I picked it up, expecting silence, but instead came a soft, wet breathing. Slow, deliberate, right next to my ear. Though I was alone, my knuckles whitened as I gripped the receiver, but I didn't dare hang up. And then I heard it, a whisper, not words, not a voice I recognized, but a sound that made my skin crawl. It was urgent, hungry, insistent. My chair scraped across the floor again. I spun around, empty. My office, my safe, predictable office, had become a trap. Shadows moved when they shouldn't. Sounds came from nowhere. And some presence, live, patient, watching, was stalking me. I realized then that staying late, working alone, wasn't an inconvenience. It was a risk. I sank back into my chair, too afraid to move. And just as I thought I might convince myself it was over, I saw it. A dark figure, crouched at the far end of the hallway, staring directly at me. Its eyes, impossible to see clearly, felt like they pierced my soul. Then it tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, and vanished into the shadows. But the echo of its presence lingered, and on the carpet, a single, long, dark smear remained, pointing toward me, like a warning I couldn't escape. By the third night, I had stopped trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. The office no longer felt like a building, it felt like a living entity, breathing and shifting around me. Every step I took echoed strangely, bouncing off walls that seemed farther apart than they should be. I had the unsettling sense that the hallways stretched and contracted at will, forming paths I hadn't noticed before. The fluorescent lights above flickered in a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, and the shadows responded, writhing in unnatural ways. I tried to keep to familiar areas, avoiding corners and darkened hallways, but the office had other plans. The break room was the first sign that something was different tonight. The smell hit me before I even saw it, a mixture of burnt coffee, decaying food, and a metallic taint that made my stomach twist. The vending machine rattled, even though it hadn't been touched. Then I heard it, a low whispering, soft and urgent, coming from inside the machine. I leaned closer, straining to make out the words, but all I could hear was a rhythmic, pleading murmur that sent chills down my spine. I stepped back quickly, my hand brushing against the counter. Something sticky clung to my fingers. I looked down, dark wet streaks marred the floor, leading toward the hallway. The footprints from the previous night had returned, longer and darker, twisting unnaturally as if the person or thing wearing them wasn't bound by normal anatomy. They stopped at the entrance to my office, and I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. Turning slowly, I caught sight of the janitor's closet. The door was slightly ajar, though I had locked it earlier, and inside, something crouched. Its shape was dark and fluid, shifting impossibly as it clung to the walls. I couldn't tell if it was human, or something else pretending to be. It moved with deliberate patience, like it had been waiting for me, studying me. My chest tightened, and my breathing grew shallow. I forced myself to look away and back at my desk, but the shadow didn't disappear. I approached my desk cautiously. My computer screen had once again turned on by itself. The desktop wallpaper now showed a photo of the office I had never seen, one where the cubicles seemed to bend inward, corridors looping impossibly, and in the center, crouched behind my own chair, was a figure, dark, distorted, faceless. Its hand reached toward me. I swallowed hard and spun around. Nothing, just my chair, empty, waiting, as if nothing had happened. Then I heard it again, a faint scrape, like nails on metal, coming from the far end of the office. I froze, straining to locate the source. The air grew thick, heavy, almost suffocating, and my head throbbed as if the building itself were pressing down on me. The lights flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows across the walls. One shadow stretched from a cubicle toward me, thin and elongated, bending impossibly as it reached for my feet. I jumped back, heart hammering, and stumbled against the wall. Every instinct told me to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The hallways twisted, shifting in ways that didn't make sense. The bathroom door appeared down a hall that hadn't existed before. The elevator trembled again, its metal doors quivering, and inside a dark shape shifted. My reflection in the elevator glass showed me staring into a face I didn't recognize, pale, twisted, and grinning as if it had waited for me to arrive all along. I ran toward my desk, my shoes slipping on the wet streaks across the carpet. My heart pounded in rhythm with the flickering lights above. I reached my chair and leaned against it, gripping the armrests as if they could anchor me to reality. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me from all directions, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Words I couldn't understand, but tones that made my stomach drop. And then I saw it standing in the corner of my office. Its shape was impossibly tall, its limbs thin and unnaturally long. Its head tilted slowly toward me, as though studying me, analyzing my fear, and then, just as suddenly, it vanished. But not completely. The echo of its presence remained, and on the floor, smeared into the carpet, was a single, wet handprint. This one was larger than any human hand, twisted, and pointing directly at me. A reminder that the office had claimed me as its own. I sank into my chair, trembling, trying to force myself to breathe normally. My eyes kept flicking to the corners, expecting the shadow to return. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder, more alive, pulsing with the building's heartbeat. I realized, with a growing horror, that the office wasn't just a place where I worked. It was a predator, patient, careful, and it had been watching me all along. And tonight I understood the truth. There was no leaving. Not really. Not ever. By the fourth night, I had stopped pretending the office was normal. It wasn't just alive, it was aware of me. Every step I took, every breath I drew, every thought I dared to think. The fluorescent lights flickered in rhythm with my heartbeat, and the walls seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting as though breathing. The air was thick, suffocating, carrying the smell of damp concrete mixed with something sweet and rotten. I tried to stay in the areas I knew, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Corridors stretched farther than they should, leading me in circles. I passed the break room, and the vending machine rattled violently, spilling a few cans onto the floor. When I looked closer, I saw them move slightly on their own, sliding across the tiles as if guided by invisible fingers. My reflection in the machine's glass wasn't quite right either. My face appeared pale, stretched, with a faint, twisted grin that I hadn't made. Every noise made me jump. The soft hum of computers was distorted, like a low chant echoing through the walls. My chair scraped across the floor, even when I hadn't touched it. The elevator trembled again, doors quivering slightly, as if something inside was pressing against them, waiting. And then came the whispers. Soft at first, almost human, but growing sharper, urgent, impossible to ignore. They came from the walls, the ceiling, even beneath the floor. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end. I passed a restroom and froze. The faucet was dripping, each drop echoing too loudly, like a drumbeat. I looked into the mirror. For a fraction of a second I didn't see my reflection at all. Instead, the glass showed a dark shape crouched behind me. Its limbs were long, impossibly thin, bending in ways no human could. I spun around. Nothing. The door was closed. The tiles were empty. But when I looked back, the shadow in the mirror had moved closer. I tried to stay at my desk, but it felt like the room itself was shifting beneath me. My chair rocked slightly, though no one was there. Papers scattered across the floor, and folders slid off shelves, landing with soft thuds. forming patterns I didn't understand. Even the walls seemed to breathe, pushing toward me then retracting, as if the office itself were alive and aware of my presence. I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but shadows crept along the walls, stretching impossibly long, bending around corners, flowing like liquid. They twisted toward me, reaching with elongated fingers that disappeared before I could see them clearly. My heart raced, and I backed into my chair, gripping the armrests as if they could anchor me to reality. Then I heard it, my own voice, whispering from the other side of the office. Soft, taunting, familiar, my name, repeated over and over, slow, deliberate. I spun toward the sound, but the office was empty. The lights flickered, casting distorted reflections in every surface. In each reflection, my face was different, twisted, pale, screaming silently. I pressed my hands over my eyes, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But when I opened them, the shadows were closer, darker, denser. The elevator doors trembled violently, and in the reflection I saw a figure step out. Its face was blurred, yet somehow it bore my features. Its eyes were hollow, empty, but filled with awareness. It tilted its head toward me, studied me, and vanished into the shadows. My pulse thundered in my ears. I realized then that the office wasn't just playing tricks on MIT, had been copying me, shaping itself around me, reflecting me, becoming something I couldn't escape. I tried the door locked. I tried the elevator again. Trembling, unresponsive, the office had me trapped, and I understood with a growing terror that there was no help coming. No one else had been here at all. My co-workers didn't remember me. The security cameras never saw me. The building itself had erased me from the world outside. And then, from somewhere deep within the walls, I heard it. A slow, deliberate tapping, like fingers drumming, counting, waiting. I backed into my desk, my knees shaking, my heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows moved closer, filling the corners, stretching across the floor, slithering along the ceiling. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were alive, watching, hunting. I sank into my chair, trembling uncontrollably. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, echoing in every reflective surface. The office had claimed me. Its presence pressed against me from all sides, and then, just before I felt my last shred of sanity slip away, I saw it, a single, impossibly long handprint smeared across the carpet, pointing directly at me, darker than anything human. The office didn't need to do anything else. That handprint was a warning, a promise. And I realized, with the deepest horror, that tomorrow, the building would want more. By the fifth night, I had stopped counting hours. Time no longer made sense in the office. The hallways twisted and stretched in ways that made my mind ache. The fluorescent lights flickered, dimmed, and brightened without pattern. Shadows clung to every corner, following me, mimicking me, sometimes overtaking me. I realized then that I wasn't walking through an office anymore. I was moving through a living nightmare that had taken my familiar world and folded it inside itself. I tried to stay near my desk, hoping the familiarity would anchor me, but even that small space had changed. My chair was slightly taller, the computer screen warped, the keyboard keys crooked as if they were breathing. Papers I had never seen were scattered across the floor, each page filled with jagged, impossible writing, the ink dark and wet, glistening in the flickering light. I picked one up and felt my skin crawl. The symbols shifted as I watched, rearranging themselves to form words I couldn't understand, yet somehow knew were meant to warn me. I moved cautiously through the hallways, searching for a door I could escape through, but every exit was gone. The elevators trembled violently, and inside the glass panels, I saw reflections that were impossible. An office that was mine, yet not mine, filled with figures with blurred faces, all staring directly at me. One figure, taller than the rest, crouched at the far end of a hallway, its head tilting slowly as if it had been waiting my entire life for this moment. My reflection in the glass showed me frozen in fear, but its reflection smiled back. The whispers returned, louder, clearer this time. Not just a voice, but hundreds of voices, all overlapping, chanting my name, calling, mocking, urging me forward. I tried to cover my ears, scream, anything but the sound came from inside my skull. From the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I stumbled, my hands grasping at nothing, trying to anchor myself to reality, but the office refused to obey the rules I knew. I passed what used to be the break room, now warped and endless. The vending machine rattled violently, its metal sides creaking. When I looked closer, I saw dozens of small, black figures moving inside the glass. They weren't human, yet they mimicked human movements. They stared at me with hollow eyes, pressed against the glass as if they wanted out. I stumbled backward, my hands hitting the counter. Something wet coated my fingers. I looked down and saw footprints too long, too dark, stretching across the floor toward me. They stopped at my desk, as if marking territory. I sank into my chair, shaking uncontrollably. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. The office wasn't just a building, it wasn't just haunted, it was sentient. It watched, it waited, it hunted, and somehow I was a part of it. My reflection, my shadow, even my own body felt like it belonged to something else now, something darker. Then I noticed it. A photo frame on the counter I had never seen before. I approached cautiously. In it was a picture of the office, but not my office. The desks were identical, the cubicles the same, yet every person in the picture was blurred, faceless, twisted in impossible ways. And in the center was a figure with my face, grinning, dark and hollow-eyed. My stomach twisted. I backed away. My reflection in the glass now matched the figure exactly, smiling at me with teeth I didn't have. The phone rang. I froze. I didn't pick it up, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could feel something behind me, warm, breathing, patient. I turned slowly. Nothing. Darkness stretched from the far corners, reaching, crawling, brushing against my skin like invisible fingers. And then I realized the office hadn't trapped me. It had absorbed me. I was already inside it, and there was no outside anymore. I tried to scream, but my voice came out as a whisper. The elevators trembled violently, and the glass reflected dozens of me, all frozen, all grinning. The shadows twisted together and pointed toward me. The walls pulsed, alive and aware, pressing closer, closing in. And then I understood. The office had been waiting for someone like me, someone who stayed too long, someone who watched too closely, someone it could copy, consume, and add to its collection. By the time morning arrived, the office was empty again. The lights flickered back to normal. The air smelled of stale coffee and paper. My chair sat neatly tucked under my desk, my computer off. My coworkers arrived, chatting about their morning commute, but no one remembered me ever being there. The security cameras showed nothing unusual. HR denied my existence. And sometimes, late at night, when the building hums softly and the lights flicker, I hear it, the whispers, the scraping footsteps, the soft, wet breathing. I catch glimpses of shadows, moving reflections in the glass that aren't mine. And sometimes, I see a new photo frame, just on the counter, showing a figure in the office, dark, smiling with my face. The office is still waiting.